So good afternoon. Welcome to the next session of the LSEC webinars from home. This is again one of the parts of our network and information security and industrial automation security series. We started this series about 4 weeks ago when basically the follow-up of the reaction on the current COVID crisis and the activities resulting from this, that most of us need to stay at home and continue working from home, where we thought, okay, if people would need to stay at home, we need to support them in their home function, also learning about cybersecurity. Normally, we would have organized network and information security and industrial cybersecurity events, such as our annual N-IAS event, but that took place actually in this case over the webinar. And so the last couple of weeks, we've had some interesting contributions by ABB, SentinelOne, Mandiant, and the likes of those, all of these, which you can still find online and with very rich and detailed insights on how to do a serious cybersecurity management for industrial environments. Today, we'll just continue with this, and we'll continue this also in the next coming weeks, while focusing on the challenges that we see on the one hand side of cybersecurity and the way that those are developing. We, of course, also have to look into how the world is evolving and how we can learn from the different challenges that we see and the way that in an organization also we have to adapt ourselves in a better way to make sure that the challenges in relation to the day-to-day operations can be met, specifically in an operational environment where it could sometimes be challenging to see, okay, especially in today's production environment, we are faced with people returning from home office. We are faced with the COVID-19 potential of being infected still, which means that we have to take double care of our cybersecurity environment in that respect. So we have today an interesting speaker that we've invited as basically the collaboration of one of the field labs that LSEC is working on today, namely Tijl Deneut from West. But before I start handing over the word to Tijl, who hopefully will be able to talk a bit about his best practices in terms of patch and updates, and seeing also what types of vulnerabilities that those bring along. I'll give you a little bit more of background on what we are trying to do as LSEC. So LSEC is a not-for-profit association based in Belgium. We are what we call ourselves a digital security catalyst, bring together end users, suppliers, and research in this environment to try to innovate in the world, but also to try to help organizations taking the next steps in becoming much more mature in the world of cybersecurity. So normally we organize these face-to-face events, but eventually we had to graduate to towards webinars in any case. We bring together a group of more than 450 cybersecurity expert members, which are the companies bringing those types of technologies. And we reach out to about 15,000 end-user organizations, both in industrial world as well as in financial services or in media and other specific vertical domains. In the world of manufacturing, we do feel at home as well. We have quite a number of activities running there, amongst others, the world of Trinity, where we help companies in making their transition towards agile manufacturing by the use of cybersecurity and also IoT and robotics. And as a result of these activities, we are capable of funding actually projects and companies for the innovative projects in robotics and in, for instance, cybersecurity. So we started within the concept of Trinity, a platform which is called Cybersecurity for Robotics, where we bring together the expertise and the research on cybersecurity for that specific robotics domain, which is a challenge in itself because we have to try to convince manufacturers of robot systems to increase their ingredients in terms of cybersecurity. And like we will be talking about today in the industrial systems, also in the robotics, there are quite a number of vulnerabilities some of those which you can definitely find also on that platform. Next to this, we also work together with a series of European organizations, research, as well as European Factories of the Future Association, where we see and where we are being challenged with the way that factories are migrating towards digital. And especially during these days, we have learned that many of those factories will need to improve themselves and will need to improve much more in terms of digital. So digital transformation for factories is a main theme that we are carrying in the domain of the platform called Connected Factories. And then we have a couple of operations here in Flanders, amongst others, the field lab of TRIF, where we operating with these devices and tools. We go into manufacturing companies, about 400 of those in Flanders, and where we install them and present immediately the results of condition-based maintenance and what it could actually mean for companies in that space. And I'm actually happy to say that in this case also our partners from HOWEST are a partner in this field lab and work together in operating the field lab in that particular space. That is part of an operation in Flanders, which is called Industry 4.0, where we are working today with together with HOWEST and together with 15 other field labs, so 17 in total, where we try to improve the factories' today's presence in terms of Industry 4.0. And then we have developed on our side, on LSEC and on TRIF side, a specific application that supports this on a day-to-day based operations, which is called Factory Sense. And with Factory Sense, we bring a couple of those best practices to the field where we can rely upon a couple of the ingredients that I presented to you just before. And so from the Factory Sense platform, we can actually bring a total solution that can bring condition-based maintenance, can bring analytics, and can bring IoT in a very condensed format with 3 steps to that space. Now, having said enough about ourselves, I'm happy to hand over the word to Tijl. Tijl, I hope you can still hear me.
Yes, I can. Hello.
And we can hear you. So okay. Thanks for joining in, and thanks for taking the next 30 to 45 minutes in explaining to us what the research of HOWEST has been about, and also, of course, what you have been doing in the field lab. But not only this, I would say, I think you're also involved already for a much longer time in this space of industrial security from within HOWEST. You're teaching students on what that really means. And I think you're also involved quite heavily in trying to understand what companies should actually be doing and have been doing up to now in trying to secure themselves in industrial security. So Tijl, the floor is yours.
Okay, let's see if I can share my screen. That should be happening right about now.
Yeah,
okay.
That's correct. We can see your screen.
Great. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I have a presentation prepared on a specific topic: industrial patch management, or lessons learned, or experiences on how to implement patches and updates, specifically in an industrial environment, which has quite some challenges. I'll have to start with introducing myself and introducing our research lab, of course, as pointed out by Mr. Scheldeslachts. I am indeed part of a research lab from HOWEST University College, and we have created a new research lab called IC4, as you can see. It's a collaboration actually between HOWEST and Ghent University, where we not only maintain cybersecurity or research cybersecurity, also our track on blockchain and AI, not so important right now. Maybe the next slide, yes. So maybe more important is who am I, where am I coming from? So I'm a lecturer at HOWEST University College, as I said, in applied computer sciences, where I teach students on industrial security as well, but especially in IT security. That's my background: IT security, network protocols, and so on. And besides that, another 50% of my day job is indeed performing research on industrial environments, on securing industrial environments, both on protocol level, patching level, network layout, and so on and so on. Of course, more details in the next of the slides, next slides of these. There are also certificates, but these are not important, not today. The most important part is, well, maybe what we will be discussing today. So from IC4, we have this proeftuin, so like Ulrich has as well, that is called ICI 4.0, so looking for solutions for SMEs and other companies for securing their industrial environment with in regards to Industry 4.0. So the agenda for this session, to dive right into it, is something like this that I have prepared. So it's about patching. I'll actually start for once with awareness. So instead of ending with awareness, I'll try to start with awareness with some demo videos to be specific, on why to patch. Probably that's already known, but I hope, if not, I'll show you why to patch, of course, what to patch, how, and so the first and the last one will be the biggest part of the presentation, especially pitfalls, because there are some issues and some pitfalls with patching industrial environments and industrial systems, right? So let's get to it. So why patching? Because security incidents, of course, do happen. No matter how hard you are secure and you're even patched, doesn't really matter that much. Security incidents is a matter of time before it happens. Sometimes this can happen by mistake, which is actually not only sometimes, most of the times are security mistakes. Some employee accidentally deleting a database, some employee accidentally double-clicking on invoice.pdf.exe, which is an email attachment, and so on. So mistakes do happen. Sometimes not by mistake, of course. You can also have hackers breaching your infrastructure from the outside, sometimes even from the inside, or even employees, disgruntled employees who are messing about in the internal infrastructure, who are deliberately causing mayhem and so on. So patching is one of the changes that will be able to fix some of these things, right? But in industrial awareness and in industrial security, the biggest focus and the biggest lesson still to be learned, sadly, of course, is that devices that are not meant to be connected to the internet are still being connected to the internet. Probably because people who are doing so are thinking, okay, that's not a big problem because no one knows my IP address. Only those with direct access to that IP address will be able to access that PRC, that production environment, that system. So that actually has a term, that way of thinking. It's called security by obscurity. And in the IT world, it's already known security by obscurity is not a good idea. That's not a security measure. It only takes time, or tools like the one I have shown up front, which has also been extensively discussed in previous presentations in the last weeks here on LSEC. So maybe a very short live demo, the only one I'll try to do today. So this is the website I was talking about. You can just click on view all and have a list of all kinds of stuff. So what is Shodan, for those of you who have not seen it before? It's a search engine that actually actively scans IP addresses over the world. So every single IPv4 address that is in the world accessible, that is public, which of course most are, will be scanned by this system, and it will actually create a database of services that Shodan has found on these IP addresses. And it does this for all ports, for all services, for all IP addresses, right? So if screenshots can be taken because, for example, there are webcams or remote desktops that are open, it will actually do that. Of course, you can then look through this. For example, if I look for port 5900, which is the very well-known port for VNC, you can already see some issues right here. So these are all examples of currently today, right now, active machines on the internet that are running VNC, which is a remote desktop environment, without passwords. So these are solely without passwords. We already even see a system that is running some ICS stuff. We can actually click on ICS and then we only see the systems that have something to do with ICS. I hope this already explains that putting something on the internet, and especially if it's an industrial system, an industrial PLC, or industrial HMI, doesn't matter, industrial anything, they are not intended to be connected directly to the internet, and somehow people still do because they might think that no one knows about it. These tools, Shodan and others, there are a lot of other tools as well, are very well known by hackers and maybe even more dangerous, the script kiddies of the world, who very happily spent a complete day looking through all these screenshots, clicking on them and making connections that you really don't like to be connected. So that's something, that's the first thing I want to show you. So some other examples are in the slides of things that are still online today. It's VNC, so it's not only view only mostly, it's something that you can click on and actually interact with in most cases. So Shodan is a very interesting tool to have a current view of what is happening on the internet, what is connected to the internet. I actually myself took it one step further and I created something else. I have written a script that did a search on Shodan every single day. So that allows me to have a historical view of specific systems that are connected to the internet. And I did this, for example, for port 502, which is a port, a TCP port that is only used, I looked this up, is only used by the protocol called Modbus. And Modbus is an open, unauthenticated, unsecure protocol for programming and reading out PLCs. So these are over time, and for some reason, beginning of March, we had a rise, of course, in the connection or the live PLCs on the internet. So each of these 20,000 and so on PLCs that are currently online can be directly spoken to, interacted with, read out, and killed even and changed. So these are through time, and we would have hoped with all the work that Ulrich and myself and other people like Dieter and so on are doing, that this would be actually going down. So far, not a really big going down line or descent is what we are seeing. So I did this for Modbus. This is worldwide. I also did this for Modbus, specifically Belgium. So this is Belgium, which is of course a different line right here. So it still follows the trend a little bit, but of course we are only, but 200 PLCs connected to the internet in Belgium is 200 PLCs too much, of course. And just FYI, the last one for S7com as well, which is specific for Siemens. It's very similar to Modbus, only it's proprietary for Siemens. So only Siemens devices are using this. And it also has no support for authentication, encryption, security, and so on. So these are all devices for companies that we know are actually, well, are actually open, wide open on the internet and findable, right? Okay. So these are some awareness stuff to let you know that it's maybe not a good idea to have industrial production PLCs not connected to the internet, of course. But what about the products that are actually created to be connected to the internet? What about that? So the first example, I have a couple of examples, not too much. The first example I want to talk about is in Belgium at least, and in the Benelux, the market leader for these kind of products. It's called Ewon. Ewon is a secure gateway, which is used in a lot of companies. Even companies that do not know about Ewon have Ewon in their factory because it's the most used gateway. It's a firewall gateway, VPN connection even, that is installed in certain black boxes machines, and those machines are then put installed by vendors, by suppliers in factories, and Ewon allows them to connect to the outside to have remote maintenance and so on without any hassle. So Ewon is a very well-known industrial vendor for secure remote access. We have done some research, we have done some collaboration, many things have already been fixed. This is an example of an issue with a fairly recent firmware. So this is the Ewon router, firmware version 13, which I'm talking about 2018, 2019. The fix was at the end of 2018, where we found an issue with firmware 13. It was a very simple to use exploit. I can show it even without having needed any extra tools or scripts or Pythons. So the first thing I do, I want to show you how the router looks like. So the router expects you to log in, right? With the username, the default username is ADM and the default password is also ADM, but let's say that is changed. So this router, by the way, it's a router, so chances are that this is connected to the internet. And when someone connects this router to the internet, this page automatically, defaultly, is also available from the internet. So this could be an internet connected firewall gateway. So what I will do now is use an exploit, and the exploit is that you have a username and password, but the password is ignored. So the only thing you need to log into this router is the username. So what I will do now is actually type in username followed by a colon, and then I will encode that. It's like translation. If you have English and Dutch, for example, it's like translating ADM into something called base 64. And then I will copy paste that encoded ADM, so only the username, to a different website to encode it once more, so a different translation you can call it, into URL encoding. And now this is actually what I need to put in the cookie. So very simple, I press F12. This works in every browser, by the way. F12, we have a list of cookies. Then we create a cookie called credentials. Within the value of that cookie, we have that URL encoded username without password. That's it. The exploit, if you can call it that, has now finished. The only thing I have to do is refresh the page of E1 of the router and notice that I am currently logged into that router as ADM, and I can do everything on that website that is able or possible on that website, including reading out clear text passwords. So the passwords for all the different users in that router are actually visible from the web interface and are decryptable, which is something that my script actually also performs. It automates all these things. So this is the first demo. Of course, the upside, this would not have been called patch management and experience and so on if there was no fix. There is a fix when you install firmware 13.1. So maybe it's an idea to go verify if that is indeed the case, if you have that newest firmware, right? So that's the first awareness part on an industrial device. The second one, which already started apparently. The second one is another vendor. You might know the vendor. No, this is not. Yes, this is the one I wanted to show you. Hold on. Yes, that's the one. A second example is on an HMI. This is something that we have found using or together with some students. So you have a PLC. It's again from a different speaker on this channel, Phoenix Contact, and they have this PLC, and the PLC is also a web server. So you can connect to the PLC using any browser, and then you can interact with the PLC to interact with your production using that web server. It's something called an HMI, human machine interface. So the way you program that human machine interface, or that website actually, is done with a program called Web Visit. So it's more like a story that I want to tell you now, because that story, it starts in 2015. If you in 2015 used that software from Phoenix Contact to actually, let me start it, to actually create a web interface for your PLC, then it would work like this, right? So this is the PLC IP. We just visit that IP address. Voila, tada, you have the connection to the PLC and you can interact with it, start and stop pumps and so on. So actually I don't have a problem with this. This is actually quite okay, because anyone can see if I put this HMI, this PLC connected directly to the internet, then everyone that has a browser is able to communicate, to interact with my production. So I don't have a problem with this. My problem actually comes with the next part, because there's no way of securing this with a password. So people might suspect maybe this is not a good idea to connect to the internet. Then enter 2015-16, where there was a new version of Web Visit. And that new version, this is not the right one. Yes, this is the right one. So that new version of Web Visit actually allows to add some security to the HMI. So this is the new version of Web Visit from 2015-2016. And as you can see, it asks for a password. However, what we have found out is that you can just look into the source code of that HMI, that website, and we notice a file called login.teq. If we enter that file directly into the browser, the file actually gets downloaded. So we now downloaded a file login.teq, and if we open it in Notepad, whatever, we can actually clearly see passwords in clear text from that HMI. So one of the passwords, for example, is superpass2, as you can see here. So I can just copy paste that password and then of course paste it in the HMI, which should allow me to get inside the HMI and again communicate with the device directly. So actually, I think this is worse. This is not so good as the first one, because people might think, okay, there is a password now. We can now connect this to the internet without an issue because it has a password. So they need a password to connect to the system. However, if it is this easy to actually find a password and then get connection and access to the production, it does more bad than it does good, right? Okay, so we reported this to Phoenix. This was a bug, an issue, a problem. So this is reported to Phoenix Contact, and then they gave it an update. So WebVisit version 6.40 from 2018. So this is the newest version, I think, even today. And if we try the same on this version, let me show you. This is how it looks like. So you are able to just try to do the same. So you will notice as soon as I open the website, it's a little bit updated, right? It's a new interface. I cannot find the password. Okay, so I'll do what I learned from the previous version of WebVisit. I open login.teq, and something has changed. Well, several things have changed, but the most important part is we don't see any passwords anymore. We see the note SHA-256, which is an algorithm for hashing, not encryption, hashing. And then below that SHA, we actually have a hash. So this is the hash of the passwords. So is this game over? Is this perfectly secure? I wouldn't say that, because what can we do now? We can go to a website, and a website that, for example, contains a couple of million, I should even say billion different hashes, and look up if the hash that I just found is in the database of that clear text passwords, right? So it is there. So apparently this hash corresponds with the password PW1, which is not a good password. I hope you agree. So I could just copy paste this password in and get in anyway. However, this is already better, because now the responsibility is with the customer, the operator or the programmer, the engineer who has created this web interface, to choose passwords that are long and difficult and hard to crack or guess. If all the passwords are long and okay, then this will not work. You will not get access to the HMI directly. So this is another case of if you perform the update, because this is of course done with the version 6.40, then it should be fixed already. I think it's almost, or it was more or less the last demo. So some others, maybe more recent. This is the one from actually 2019. It was disclosed in 2019. Sometimes even software that is meant to provide security, for example, Fortinet SSL VPN, which is of course very popular right now, the last weeks with Corona and working from home. Well, in 2019, in the summer of 2019, it was disclosed, it was found out that there was a pretty interesting bug in the web interface, so the interface that was publicly available for Fortinet. We actually have written an article on that. You feel free to check it out. But this is how it works. It's a bit too simple. You replace the language parameter with these details, and the things you see in your browser, what you see in your browser looks like this. I blacked out some stuff, but for example, Birds, who is part of the group root and who has full access, his clear text password for accessing VPN was behind this red bar. For Veronique, just the same, this was her clear text password on this specific VPN. This allows any hacker to have full access to the network remotely. And in this case, these were even domain users. The domain name was also here, not important. They were domain users. So after getting access to the VPN, you even have access to the Windows domain and to all the networks, of course, of that production facility. This is an issue. Again, an update of Fortinet fixed it quite easily and quite rapidly, but still the updates needs to be done manually. I don't think Fortinet performs automatic updates. So updating, patching is extremely important, especially for this one. Then one final and most recent one example that I want to show you or talk to you about is from 2020, actually. It was the beginning of this year, where there was an issue, a remote code execution on another service that was actually meant to be connected to the internet, specifically Microsoft Exchange service. So companies who are still running Microsoft Exchange, so this is not an issue if you use Office 365 and so on, but if you're running Exchange, chances are that you are doing that on-premise, on your own environment. That machine is connected to the internet, of course. It's a machine that is intended to be connected to the internet. And anyone that has any connection to that machine, any login to that machine, has full authenticated remote code execution as administrator, and the exploits can be found on Shodan, by the way, and on exploit database and so on. This was one that I created and put online, but there are others as well. I'm not the detector of this issue, but this is only fixable if you have the newest exchange. So the bug is also there in Exchange 2010, 2016, and so on. So updates are very important, right? And it keeps going on. This is a screenshot of the Patch Tuesday, so the most recent patch round for Microsoft, where there were 15 critical issues in Windows, actually, in Microsoft software, but it was Windows. It was Windows 7 and Windows Server 2008 R2 and so on, who had most of these critical issues. Oracle as well was also impacted. So it keeps on going. This is actually Patch Tuesday of every month. It's like a celebration day for the hackers, because they get info on the most recent faults and issues that were found on Microsoft software and other software. Oracle also has a Patch Tuesday, and they dive onto it, finding out what has happened, what is fixed, and to exploit that. All right. So that was the major part on awareness. Maybe we'll get more on that later, but maybe it's also time for some solutions, right? I'm not here to only create some awareness, although that's usually where it starts. Solutions, and there are, of course, a lot of solutions, and all of them are equally important, or well, all of them are important, right? You need a firewall, you need intrusion detection systems and network access controls. Permissions are very important. Antivirus is very important, and antivirus and updates together. You want to update your antivirus and so on. Backups are also important with the crypto lockers today and so on. So this is the general slide. Of course, we will focus on updates for the rest of the slides. So let's dive into the next part. What to patch? So what do you need to update to patch first? Well, the simplest answer, of course, is everything. You want to update and patch every single device in your environment, and that's actually a biggest risk and a biggest challenge, because there are a lot of things in your company, in any network, that you might forget that are there. I'm thinking about printers, I'm thinking about access points, about switches, routers. What's the last time you have updated a managed switch that was somewhere in your network? Not many people do that. However, we do have some issues, and even some malware that misuses common switches, things like that. So what to patch? Everything, of course, we have to make it a little bit feasible and a little bit real world as well. There are some priorities in what to patch. And to discuss the priorities, we have to talk about risk. I'm not a man to talk in great lengths about risk. I'm not a risk engineer and so on. But I think you might want to quantify your risk, and then based on that quantification, the most riskful applications and software and hardware should be patched more or often and thoroughly, right? So the first step, of course, should be the internet reachable systems. They are always a much higher risk because there are more people who have access to them. They are internet reachable. We already learned about Shodan and all the people who are using Shodan to find issues. So in a matter of speaking, today there is a new vulnerability in Microsoft. Tomorrow someone might misuse that on your internet reachable system, or E1 or Cisco or whatever. So maybe some general tips. Try to plan patching and updates into the agenda. I know it's hard to do, and it's hard to find time, a day or even a week in your schedule to just get down and start patching and start updating and looking what patches and updates there are. So please try to actually include them into your agenda. Patch day once a week, or not once a week, once a month is already enough. Even once a year, as long as it's planned in your agenda. So that's pretty interesting, pretty important. Again, also be flexible enough for emergency interventions, because there are a lot of examples like the ones I already showed you, but there are others as well, where you were not able, you did not have the luxury to wait a couple of weeks or even 1 week to patch your systems. I have a couple of examples, one here as well. Beginning of January of this year, there was a very large Citrix issue with Citrix NetScaler. Some of you might remember it. where you had remote code execution on a Citrix NetScaler and therefore access to the entire network. These are the kind of things, if you wait 2 weeks before taking action, that it could already be too late. They would install crypto lockers or would put your entire production down. We all remember the WannaCry issue in 2017. I still remember very well when that 0 day, that issue with Microsoft, with Windows, was actually dropped, released into the wild. It was the Friday before Easter, the Easter weekend, a long weekend. So the best day or the worst day to actually put a 0 day on the internet. In 2020, there was in 2019, there was Bluekeep. This is a mistake, it should be 2019. And then in 2020, there was Bluegate and so on. Go look them up if you have no idea what they are and you are using Microsoft, because both of them are for Microsoft. What's other tips to do, because you have plans and updates? How did you find these updates? What are sources to follow to notice if there is a critical update? Should I follow Twitter or should I follow LinkedIn or whatever? Sure, go ahead, follow Twitter, follow what other people. But if you are using certain specific software or manufacturers in your company, most of them do have some advisories and some up-to-date pages that you can actually use or follow and even get alerts on if something changes on that pages, if something, well, critical drops. For example, for VMware, a lot of people are using VMware. This is an interesting page. 7.0 was released less than a month ago, and already we have our first critical vulnerability. Again, also for the other ones, of course. Siemens, a very interesting one. Siemens has their own CERT, their own cyber emergency response team that releases advisories on issues, 0 days, and critical vulnerabilities that are in their software and hardware for Siemens. Drupal, there are links like this for almost every vendor, bigger vendor out there. Phoenix Contact has them, Beckhoff has them, Schneider has them, and so on. So this could be interesting. Subscribe for these kind of pages that you have for software that you actually are using. So that's what to patch. Then the next part is how to patch. So how do we patch a system that is running on an industrial control system environment, right? So, or an OT environment, SCADA, ICS. That's a little bit trickier. Actually, I'll spend most or even all of the remainder of this presentation on how to patch. So we have a theoretical part. So in theory, how do you patch your industrial environment? You use something called an active patch cycle. All the sources for the screens and the images that I use are actually in the source of the slides, which are shareable. So you'll get it as well. So in theory, you'll use a typical active patching cycle. In theory, you'll use tools like WSUS, right, WSUS, which helps you manage, automate, approve Microsoft updates. Which is tricky for industrial systems. Very important and interesting is how to patch use testing environments, which is also in the patch cycle. So you have something called industrial test setups, where you have these test racks. I think I have a photo of that, right? So you have a duplicate, a clone of your configurations of the PLCs that are in your environment. And when you want to perform an update of a PLC or a router or a switch that I can see here, this is a switch. We have a remote access system, a Nixon, and so on. So you want to update those, maybe run that updates first on these test racks before deploying them into production. Things like digital twins might help in some cases, especially for software updates. If you have redundant installations, you have two setups who are doing exactly the same, it might be an idea to first update one of the two, then wait a week to be very sure that everything still works, and then perform the other one. Try to perform patching. So if you are putting patching and updates in your agenda, why not in the window that is being maintained for downtime, for maintenance, and so on. So put your installations of patches into those downtimes. Also use the downtimes to perform backups, also very important, because if a patch goes wrong, you will probably also need that backup. So backups are also interesting. And of course, there's the big power, I'm a big promoter of that, of virtual machines. Almost every software that exists and most of the PLCs have their virtual counterparts that can be run on a virtual machine. I have Siemens simulators running in virtual machines, Beckhoff, Phoenix Contact, Schneider's I have running virtually on a machine that are even able to patch and in some cases even use IOs and stuff like that. Okay, so this seems pretty straightforward, right? But it's still theory. So that's one slide on theory. Okay, this is how I use my virtual machines. Also very interesting. You have something called snapshots in virtual machines, and you can go back in time. If you still have certain versions of Windows and you want to know if the patch works on that, try to install them, and you can roll back and so on and so on. So snapshots, if you have virtual machines without snapshots, try to learn about what is a snapshot and use it. But this slide is on the theory part, the theoretical part of patching. The rest of the slides is, of course, in practice. What are the pitfalls? What are the issues, the experience that we have with patching industrial environments? There are even a lot of issues, and the issues I'll be discussing in the next slides are most commonly on industrial environments and not so much IT environments. The first one I want to discuss is called support. Support might fall down, break your vendor support as soon as you install certain updates. An example I want to talk to you about is Siemens. Siemens actually has a page that is being maintained to have a list of updates that could be problematic when used in conjunction with their software. This is an example of WinCC. So they have this Excel, and if you open the Excel, it looks like this, where they specifically note that if you install this Microsoft patch, then the test result failed, WinCC might crash, your production might crash as soon as you install these updates. And there are updates that are from older days or from 2018 and stuff like that. If I'm not mistaken, the Spectre and Meltdown patches caused some big mayhem on WinCC. So this is a page to follow if you still want vendor support. And of course, if you still want your industrial environment to run, your support might break. Actually, you have even an example. If you have a worm installed and you want to remove it, then there is this example where it actually harms your plants, stops the things from working. Actually, Siemens has an even larger tool, a compatibility tool, which looks like this, where you can select a piece of software that you have running in your environment. As an example, I have selected WinCC version 12, and then it will tell you in a list which kind of softwares are allowed to run or are tested and working on the same machine as this software. For example, certain versions of Trend Micro, so the gray ones, will break WinCC or might break WinCC in some cases. The ones in black are actually allowed and tested and will work. So WinCC on a specific virtual hardware, not a good idea. Symantec will work, Kaspersky will not work, and so on. So you can have the link right here. You can actually check all the software parts of Siemens that you have with TIA Portal, with WinCC and other stuff, and it will show you what works and what not, and what is supported and what not as well. So support is a big deal. Another example, an example that I actually found 1 week ago. This is PLC programming software from 2020. You can download this right now in a demo form from their website to install on your Windows system to, of course, program and engineer these PLCs. However, once I launched the installer for the software for these PLCs, there was this little pop-up. We'll read it together. The pop-up says that before continuing with the setup program, please be sure to disable any antivirus software. Sorry. So I'll even make it a little bit bigger. This was a little bit of a surprise for me, right? That in 2020, we still have software, PLC programming software to be specific, that you want to install, and that only will be installable if you disable your antivirus software. This is another example of where support might break and where patching, of course, as well becomes very different if the vendors strongly advise not to patch. So that's support. And another one that is a big issue, more an issue in industrial environments and less in IT environments, is legacy. I expect in most IT environments, Windows 7 and older is actually being, well, migrated away, not being used anymore. But too bad, that's not the case, of course, in industrial environments. Industrial environments have very often older operating systems that are still in use and still supported by the main vendor, maybe, but not by Windows or by the operating system vendor. This is actually a screenshot or a list that I found on the website of Rockwell. where they list the compatibility of their software packets for the specific Windows version that they will work on. Red means that it will certainly not work. Yellow means we have not tested it, so no support. And green means it's tested, it works. So you can see that Windows 2003 is a little bit supported for the most, well, not the most recent one at the time of my investigation. You can see that the only supported operating systems were Windows 7, Windows 7 Professional, and that's it. And maybe on 8 it works, on Windows 10 it does not work. So this is of course an issue, because as of a couple of months ago, Windows 7 is completely out of support. If there are issues with Windows 7, there are no updates anymore for that operating system. So this could be an issue. Another example, some operating systems that are shipped on PLCs today. So you buy a PLC today. This is a screenshot from Backoff, from a PLC CX 9022 to be very specific. So this is a screenshot from the PLC that you can buy today, and it is shipped with Windows Compact Embedded that you can see here. So this operating system is going out of support, and is even out of support in specific versions. And we actually have found some vulnerabilities on this. So there will not be any more updates, although to be very fair, they have announced only a couple of weeks ago, but Beckhoff has announced that they will drop support for WinCE in favor of something called TwinCut, so PLCs running on FreeBSD. It's coming in the next 5 years, so we still have about 5 years to wait before we will see the first ones. For me, they can't come quickly enough, because we did found some very heavy issues with these PLCs, which are still being sold today. So an example of legacy, you cannot update this. For example, this is another demo, very short demo. So Microsoft has actually released a tool called Serhost to remotely administer a Windows environment. So it uses a password, the Windows password. If you don't specify the correct password, connection does not work. However, we detected that the check for the password is not being done on the PLC or on the operating system side, but it is done within this executable. So this executable is actually responsible for verifying if the password was wrong or correct. So I created a version of my own that skips that password check. So I can just connect directly to the PLC running Windows CE Compact Embedded without a password or whatever, and I have direct access to the Windows, which is in this case running an HMI, and I connect and change and so on. And this is, you can call this a 0-day, because it is actually a vulnerability in software from Microsoft. Serhost is from Microsoft. It's not from Backoff. And Microsoft is not maintaining this operating system and this software anymore. So this will never be patched. As soon as you have this system running in your environment, someone can take over without the need for a password this way. So this is an example of a legacy system that will probably disappear soon. So legacy is an issue. I'll have solutions for the pitfalls at the end of the pitfalls as well. Maybe interesting to know. Okay, another pitfall, downtime. As you might know, you have the CIA triad, which is called CIA in an IT environment, where confidentiality is very important, followed by integrity, followed by availability. However, that CIA triad is a little bit upside down when we are looking at industrial control systems, right? Where very high availability. So it is not an exception for production environments to be running for months or even years at a time. In a lot of companies, there is this week or 2 weeks maintenance window where the production is shut down for 1 or 2 weeks for an entire year. And then after the maintenance, the entire year long, the things have to be running. This is, of course, a large problem, a large issue for patching and for updates. How will you update a switch that is running on your production environment if an update means that that switch is to be rebooted and your entire production falls down, crashes as soon as you want to install that update? So that's a big issue, right? Updating means downtime, loss of production, loss of money, and not a good idea. If there are maintenance windows, you can use those to patch, but it's not always doable, right? So this is another big pitfall or issue. So in conclusion, for the pitfalls, patching industrial environments is just not always possible. Sometimes it's just impossible to patch. You can have all the theoretical parts, all the practical parts in place, but patching, if it's too old, too risky, too much downtime, too much support loss, or just not feasible because it's not reachable and so on, then patching is just not an option. So maybe we can discuss other options besides patching. And actually I have a quote of my own. So I would say in an industrial environment, when something is not patchable, unpatchable, maybe try to make sure it is also unchangeable. If it's not patchable, then maybe you can configure it and set it up in a way that no one can patch it in your place. Because if hackers patch your system, then it will be patched by a virus instead of the normal patch, of course. So that's the biggest risk of patches, that someone else makes use of vulnerabilities. So if something is unpatchable, maybe make it unchangeable. So what does this mean? It means that if you make it unchangeable, that you will not allow or make it as impossible as possible to not have accidental or deliberate changes on the hardware or software part of your setup. This could be the PLCs, it could be the switches, it could be the entire machine, doesn't matter. And if changes are to be done or are possible or are necessary, include monitoring or version control. Make sure that those changes are trackable or detected, and even trackable. Where are they coming from? If something is not patchable and it has to be changeable, which is of course an option, then make sure that you know what changes are happening when. So by using monitoring. So the remainder of the slides will provide some tips and pointers on and examples on how you can achieve this. Of course, some of them, if not all of them, I don't know, it's a very personal state of affairs. Some companies will be even further than this or not as far as this, and sometimes things might just not be feasible. But let's start with the hardware level. What can you do on a hardware level to prevent changes, malicious or unintended or whatever? If we look purely at the hardware, these are these things called USB locks or USB port blockers that will disallow someone to put a thumb drive for changes, for updates and so on, without having this small device to unlock it again. So this is something that in a lot of slides on industrial control system security can be seen. So this would prevent someone from plugging something in and changing it with updates or patches or malicious updates and malicious patches. That's one way. There is also something called this USB port blocker. It looks like this. I found it. So maybe you still want to have used for USB ports for a keyboard or a touch screen, which also uses a USB and so on. So this could be a solution where someone is not able to unplug a USB stuff and replug it. So this could be a solution on a hardware level. On a network level, on the hardware of the network, of course, something that I always mention in all of my slides, network segmentation, right? Maybe even think to yourself, if a device is not patchable and you cannot update it, you cannot, if it's running Windows 98, for example, so it's not patchable, but it still has to be online all the time, does it have to be connected to a network? A system that is not connected to a network will be very hard for hackers to attack, right? So unplugging from the network could be an interesting idea. Why not? I do know of certain companies who have very critical systems that they don't want to have any downtime. They do not connect it to the network, but they still want monitoring. They still want to know on the display what is happening. So what these companies do is they set up a webcam, a network webcam, connected or viewed on the display of that industrial environment. And then the webcam is connected to the network. So you only have connection one way direction. Actually, you can see what is happening on this legacy system, but you have no way of changing it, which means that the hackers also have no way of changing it. To continue with that, I actually have a different example. Say that you have data on the network that is supposed to go from production to office. So you want to read out what is happening on your PLCs. Data has to go from your PLCs to your data center or whatever, to your OPC service and so on, but not back. Then there are some solutions. There are even managed solutions, the diode systems. There are commercial systems available. And some some of our colleagues, this is a colleague from France, Arnaud Souly, who also does some awareness on industrial environments. He has created a scheme for an open data diode, so an open source system that you can see. You can actually very clearly see it. It's a fiber optic cable. Two cables would be transmit and receive, but only one is plugged in here because it's only able to transmit and not receive. That's why it's like that. Excuse me. So this is a very hard way and a hard way of be completely sure that you will only be able to have traffic going in one direction and not the other one. Of course, there are also well, commercial solutions for this. Okay, so that's the hardware level. Can I click? Yes. The software level, there are also some solutions that can help prevent changes, right? A good example and a good tool that's even without patching and updating could be a very good addition to your tool set. Version monitoring. An example specific for industrial version monitoring is called Version Dog, which is actually monitoring a PLC. It's like Chef and Puppet, but then for PLCs, and it will monitor if changes are being done and from where those changes are coming. And these changes have to be approved or not, or alerted and so on. And it keeps track of the different versions that are being installed in PLCs. So as soon as, for example, Stuxnet tries to change the programming on a PLC, this software would notice that and would of course create an alert. Then you have network management tools. Some of them have actually been demonstrated on this channel in the past weeks and will be probably presented on in the few weeks to come or in the weeks to come. Our research project, or ICI 4.0 research project, one of the main missions of that research project is to compare some of those network management tools. You might know about Darktrace, Nozomi, Cyberlens, and so on, Trend Micro. These tools perform network monitoring in different ways and try to visualize what is happening on your network. If a new system is added to your network that is doing some programming that is never been seen before, then they will raise an alarm, for example. And of course, on network level, network segmentation, installing software firewalls, because we're on software level, software routing, VLANing, which is in between software and hardware. It can make it nearly impossible for an unpatchable system to be attacked. It might still be connected to the network, but maybe put it on a different VLAN so that it is completely unreachable from any machine that is in the data center, for example. Just an example. Then probably one of the last slides, I think, prevent changes on the operating system level. So on an operating system level, are there things that you can do to actually prevent malicious or non-malicious changes? These are actually techniques that are being used to lock down kiosk systems or lockdown systems for operators. One of them that is actually built into more modern Windows operating system is called AppLocker. If you configure AppLocker correctly, and that's of course a big if, but if you use it correctly, it uses rules to whitelist to allow only specific applications, specific scripts, specific installers, and so on to run on Windows. In the default setup, it only allows exes that are in the Windows System 32 folder and only whitelisted exes that are in the program files folder. In other words, someone who is putting an exe on the desktop or even the temp folder and tries to execute it, it will not work. AppLocker will not allow it. You need to be an administrator for this to be able to disable AppLocker and to run any other exes. These are for modern Windows operating systems. Of course, if something is unpatchable, it's probably also because it's an older Windows operating system. And again, also for that, there are solutions. For older systems, for example, there are tools like Windows Steady State. It's created by Microsoft, by Windows, and it does more or less the same. It can create restrictions. In other words, it monitors all changes to the file system, and if you reboot it, all these changes are gone. So it disallows any changes on file system level. The same exists for Windows 7, by the way, only it's called Steadier State. But both are freeware tools that you can just install on Windows, requires passwords to be able to still install something on your environment that is allowed by you, of course. And without those passwords, neither malicious hackers nor malware cryptolockers will be able to change anything in a normal way. Okay, so this is the last slide. I wanted to finish with another quote. It's on patch management, the presentation. So planned patching is of course good. Reactive patching, so patching as soon as you see a breach, is not so good. And try to put it in your agenda, because rushed patching is usually ugly, right? And you have of course these phases. I have an entire article and an entire PDF on this in the notes of this presentation, of this slide, if you want to know more, of course. And of course, you're always free to ask questions at this point. Okay, this was my main presentation. I'm not sure about timing.
The time is completely wasted by now, but that doesn't really matter because it was highly interesting, Tijl.
Thank you.
So yeah, we reached already 1 p.m. But as I said, it doesn't really matter. We'll just continue for a bit. So in the first place, thanks a lot for this. It was really great. A very good overview, very comprehensive, very detailed also. There was so much content in it that I think indeed many people would like to see your slides and use them later on for further reference. So yeah, I think there's probably a couple of questions not yet coming from the participants, but a couple of questions that were raised, at least in my mind. I think the first one that I always meet when I'm in industrial environments where people are trying to get a smart way of answering cybersecurity in an industrial system is we actually do not connect our system. What's your typical answer to those?
If it's not connected, then the risk will be, of course, much less. So my answer is that's already a very good starting point. Some people call it the air gap, right? If something is not connected to the network, it's air gapped. That will prevent most automatic attacks, which are happening a lot lately, cryptolockers and malware and so on. But of course, you are not 100% secure. 100% security does not exist, of course. But there's even an example of a virus that was present on the International Space Station. So that was also an air gap, or even a gap without air between. So if that can be attacked, so we don't have to go you don't have to be paranoia, right? I think if someone says this system is not connected to the network, do I have to worry about it? I would say not, right? The chances are very, very low that your first breaches and your first security issues will not be with that system. That being said, the risks are still there. For example, if that system is still being maintained or changed in other ways. Stuxnet, for example, is a very famous virus, and it was actually dispersed using thumb drives. It installed itself on a thumb drive, and it used some issues with how Windows deals with shortcuts, for example. So as soon as your Windows shows a shortcut, instead of just showing the shortcut, it executes the code behind it. That's how Stuxnet for some part worked. And that's of course a risk if you have a thumb drive with shortcuts on it that you might not even know are there, and you put that in your air-gapped system, it's breached, it's game over. So to prevent that, for example, but that's again, that's also already a little bit in the neighborhood of paranoia. Why not use an intermediate station? I know of companies, nuclear companies, but whatever. I know of companies who have this air gap between networks, and each network has their own set of thumb drives. So yeah, they have, I believe, even red and yellow thumb drives. The yellow thumb drives are for the office network, and the red ones never leave the production network. And then they have one machine that is not connected to the internet, where they plug in both thumb drives, or one at a time. They copy paste the product, the software that they want to program, or the zip or whatever. They copy paste it to the desktop. Then they unplug the yellow one, plug in the red one, put that on the red one, and then with the red one they go to install that software. That's of course borderline paranoia, but it improves again the security by quite some percentages. But where does it end?
Yeah, you can definitely call it paranoia. But I think, of course, in the back end, it all has to do with the risk exposure and the risk appreciation that we talked about last week. And as you mentioned, I mean, that's not your theme today, but yeah, I think it has to do in that sense with whoever you think is going to target you might see this as an opportunity. The reverse side of having an isolated system being not connected is, of course, that what can you do with it? Because you cannot centrally automate it. You cannot monitor it. You cannot really see what's going on unless you put all sorts of different external sensors on it, which then might cause a similar type of result in any case. Okay, yeah. So I think it's a typical thing that we see in terms of companies trying to as I said, to smarten out this this idea of not going into domain of cybersecurity efforts, and just figuring out, okay, we'll try to be a bit better than everybody else, and so we just don't do anything in terms of the patching because it's the easiest way. And we'll at least say that we are disconnecting our system from the rest of the network. Mm-hmm. I raised while you were talking, Tijl, a couple of polls. I share with you some results of it, and I hope you can see them here. And maybe a good thing would be to give a bit of your appreciation of how people have responded to it. So yeah, how often do you patch and update your system? And as I was expecting, at least there is 20% that says never. I think that person is going to come back in the next poll in any case. After regular review of risk vulnerabilities and impact analysis, 40% has answered to this. And somebody has also answered, 20% has answered once a week. What would be your recommendation on this, seeing all of the different options here?
I think multiple answers should be connected depending on the definition of your systems, because if you update your systems weekly and you are in a medium enterprise, then you will update your systems all week, and your day job is to update, I think. And especially in industrial environments, there are not often updates every week. But if it's in your agenda every week, and sometimes you have an update and sometimes you don't, then weekly is okay. But for industrial environments, I would say once a month is enough. For non-industrial environments, so your internet-based or internet-directed systems, like your firewalls and your industrial intrusion detection systems, or your VPNs and your mail servers and your web servers and so on, then yeah, maybe those weekly, or at least weekly, verify if there are some critical updates that needs to be installed, right? You might even have two different update schedules, one for critical security updates and the other one for normal feature updates. That's of course not weekly, things like that. Right.
Yeah, I think also that the majority has given here, regular review of risk vulnerabilities and impact analysis is definitely also, at least to my feeling, the better one. Yes. Because even if you do weekly, then you still need to check, also according to what you were showing during the presentation, quite a number of checks to be made whether it doesn't actually causes more harm than it could actually be of a resolution. Mm-hmm. Okay, so thanks for that in any case. In the same let's say question, I asked them what are, let's say, the best practices in terms of what do you think you have when you think you have discovered a vulnerability, or what do you do in any case if you think you have discovered, or if you have discovered a vulnerability in one of your production systems. And so here we get a bit of similar types of reactions as I was aiming for. So some say, okay, patch it immediately if that's available. Some others go for the isolation option, which I think both of them are definitely correct. Yes. I like the ones on the bottom. So one, curse Microsoft, sit down, relax, and wait for the next newest Netflix series to appear. What would be your preference?
I'm not seeing the results, but
okay, yeah, sorry. Here you
now
go.
I am. Yep. Yeah, the patch immediately and isolate. Well, patch immediately if available, depending on the system, could of course be a little bit of a risk itself. There are examples, and too bad, of course, but there are some examples even on where the patches were worse than the original vulnerability. I remember a very nice story on Apple a couple of years ago, 2 years ago. They released their operating system High Sierra, I believe, for a MacBook, and then there was a bit of a vulnerability in macOS. The vulnerability was that if you want to log into the system, you enter the username root without a password, you press enter and it says password wrong. And then you try it again and then it says password correct and it logs you in as root. So I think we can agree that that is a pretty heavy vulnerability. Okay, they patched it, but the patch caused that the file sharing services did not work anymore, for example. So not for example, that's what happened. So the patch was not so good. So if you patch immediately this kind of system and it uses file sharing system, solutions, then you have a problem. And then they created very quickly, immediately, right? A patch for the patch. And that patch indeed fixed the file sharing mechanism again, but it caused the original root vulnerability to return. So that was again not so good. And I have several examples, for example, for Android and in industrial systems as well. So even with patch immediately, do not forget to go through the testing phase or the checking phase. Maybe first take a corner edge issue or system that has that vulnerability, but where the risk if it fails or if something goes wrong is a little bit less, and install that patch first there and see how it reacts to your kind of traffic and your kind of setup. And then of course, as soon as possible, try to patch everything. Right. So the immediately is a bit of a trigger for me, but isolation, if possible, should actually always be available or possible. Maybe create even a patch VLAN. I know companies who have that. That VLAN has access to the internet, for example, but not to any other parts of the network, and it's even segregated for every device separately. So it has access to the internet for patching purposes, and then no more, and then they can shift it between VLANs, things like that. There are a lot of solutions that are possible.
Yeah, I think it was last week that that you also suggested, or that there was one of the talks where the jump hosts came into play. Where do you see the jump host as a potential role to play here in this case as well?
Well, you can actually just jump hosts or jump stations, as we discussed in the previous presentation, was indeed it was used for remote access to a system, and instead of giving suppliers or customers or employees direct access to the PLC or the system that they want to address, they first get access to a virtual machine. So this is the critical part. The jump host or jump station is a virtual machine where they do have full access on, but that machine is in its own segregated VLANs, network, firewalls, whatever, to have only connection to the machines that it's supposed to have access to. And why not? That machine will probably have software installed to manage, to install, to program that PLC or that environment. It will have software installed, and it is a virtual machine. So why not use that to first test patches on? Because since it's a jump host, it will probably have snapshots and things like that. So it is a good candidate and a good assistant to actually first run updates and patches on to see if everything keeps working as intended. Right? So that could play a role in that case.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I think it's some good suggestions in any case also to the people that are working here on a day-to-day operation in the field. If today you would be looking for re-engineering of a system, of an operational environment, what would be your recommendation that people would need to be looking for in terms of both times of updates that they would maybe need to require from a vendor, or at least the time to react from a vendor, or maybe even basically the software by design? I see, and I mentioned it, I think last week and the week before as well, in some industries, like in the medical domain, but also in the industrial domain, there are more and more ideas popping up on the definition of the software guides. So what has been implemented, how has it been implemented, giving actually a guidance to all of this, if you like, basically the software description of what has been programmed, up to the level of this is what's actually in there, and this is actually what we expect that any system should be working with. So how would you see that people would need to start looking in the future to those systems? What would they need to require, also when it comes to patching and to updating?
Yes, I think in that case, lifetime becomes very important. And of course, the agreements that you have with your supplier. If you are negotiating with a supplier and someone who wants to install their software, their hardware at least, their production machine in your company, be it medical or industrial, then you have this a maintenance contract, for example, and a license agreement and a service agreement and things like that. And updates, patches, and should be in there, right? So you should have that contract that states how often they will be performing maintenance, if updates are part of that maintenance, if patches are needed, and so on. What happens if on systems that they use that you have maybe no knowledge of, but systems that they use, if there is a critical vulnerability, how quickly will they jump on that wagon, or will they just wait for the next patch round, which is a month later, things like that. They should be in the license and in the service agreements that you have with your supplier. So it could be a good idea to have that service agreement being read by your security officer of your company, for example, so that he can point out that, okay, for this system that you want to install, it will have complete access or continuous access to the internet, or the supplier will have continuous access to that machine, things like that. And how often should it be patched? And not only how often, but how long. If it is in the license agreement, we will patch it every month for the next 12 months, and you buy a system that is intended to work for 6 years, then there is a big issue there as well, of course. If after 1 year they stop patching it because it's not in the license agreement or service agreement, and they expect you to do it, and of course you have no idea that you have to do it, then you end up with a system that you forgot exists, or that you forgot needs updates, and you have big issues. So these are the kind of things that you probably want to look for when deciding what to buy.
Yeah, so this is one that's indeed a very good idea. I mean, putting it into a contract, into a service contract. This was one of the things that I was talking about. So it's called software bill of materials. That's one of the ideas and the options that we are in any case trying to seek through. For instance, also on the robot systems, and that's basically that you present by the time that you buy a new system, that you ask basically the vendor that he comes up with this bill of materials, like you would have when you would buy a large system, that it also includes a clear indication of this is really what's in there. These are the different components, and you know, at least when you need to do updates, that you know what to start looking for. One of the concepts that we also investigate is in that respect to reduce the regression testing time. So if, like yourself, you find vulnerabilities, you report them to the vendors, and the vendors then take probably somewhere between 6 months up to 36 months to actually respond and to get an answer. This is also what you then can try to avoid, so that at least the time to do these regressions is it's much less, and that at least maybe there's not that much a service contract that says, okay, I'm going to patch it within, I don't know what, 6 weeks. At least that you can get an agreement from the vendor that they will do their utmost best to do this, to have it at least limited in terms of reaction time. And then the third one that we are working on is what we call reference integrity manifest. So where there's a baseline environment that even can be linked to something like trusted compute, and then from the reference integrity manifest, you might be able to do some changes. You might be able to say, okay, I'm going to make some other types of developments which are fading a little bit away of the reference manifest, But at least there is this thing that we can come back to in case it doesn't really work, or in case that the vulnerabilities are not fully there. What's your thinking about those ideas?
They are good ideas indeed. In software, and in software is already the case. If you buy a software, that you want to know what parts, what frameworks are used within that software packet, and it is something that is still missing in a lot of industrial environments where you buy something called a black box, and you have no idea what is in that black box, what kind of software, what kind of hardware, what kind of backdoors, because in industrial environments there are a lot of things that have backdoors, which is hard-coded passwords and things like that are in there that nobody knows except the ones that have implemented it. So a sort of open source and overview of the total package is a very good idea. I think it's still far away, because as we know, the OT and the industrial environment is learning from IT, but is coming a bit behind, especially on security parts. But the open parts are also starting to cycle through, because in the old days, with old days, I mean 5 years ago, so not the old days, but like 5 years ago, a lot of companies, Siemens, Beckhoff, Phoenix Contact, they were running their own proprietary operating systems, their own proprietary protocols and systems, sometimes that do not even have a name. And in like 5 years, Siemens has released an industrial IoT gateway that is running normal Debian Linux. I just told in the presentation, Beckhoff is coming out with something based on BSD, FreeBSD. The Cinema Remote Connect server from Siemens is running, I believe, Arch Linux, so Linux as well. So we do notice some shifts. The new Phoenix Contact PLC Next is also having some open components and so on. So even Microsoft is going the open source way. So I would really be very glad to see that cycle through into industrial environments.
Okay, so you see that as a positive evolution. That's also interesting to hear. I'm in the same league as you are, but I think that many people coming the OT world and still trying to be fixed to the old world would like to stick to that, and so still keeping it not connected to the network and definitely as obfuscated as possible. Okay, one final difficult question for you. I'm putting you on the spotlight here, but it's great presentation, great answers. So I think one challenging thing that I see in many cases that organizations have is when they have their operational systems being managed and being operated and run also on the service contracts by a vendor or by a system integrator or something of a kind. And not always, therefore, they do take the accountability along. I think that was one of the points that Vincent last week was making as well when doing your risk analysis. Actually, the company, your operating company, is in the end accountable and responsible for everything. Maybe it's not so much always responsible, but at least you're accountable. If everything goes completely bankrupt, then you will be held accountable for it. So, how to deal with those vendors that actually should be doing this updating, patch management, but are just not simply doing it because it's not part of their service and maintenance contract? What would be your suggestion to companies that have those types of challenges?
Yeah, in short, pick other ones if there are. But I think it will be the future. If there aren't any, then they will surely arrive soon, right? The suppliers that are a little bit more open in their communication and in their license agreements and that will employ those. But I am also realistic in the fact that that's not always viable, and especially if you have this legacy, if you have these systems that you bought 10 years ago or even 3 years ago, where you are not looking into these license agreements, then you're stuck with it for years to come. So then you will have to look elsewhere for your solutions as well, and be not afraid if you suggest that something from a black box is doing something you don't expect, and you know it still works without network. just unplug that cable or unplug the antenna for 3G, 4G, things like that, or pull out the SIM cards. If you bought the system, then it's probably your right to do that. I know it's a bit hard and harsh, and not a lot of people will dare to do that. But it's like we all, some of us have Telenet and some of us have other stuff, but you have these digicorders, these recording systems on your TV. But these digicorders are not ours. They are from Telenet. And these digicorders, these systems that are giving digital TV to your TV, they are also doing things that we do not know yet. There are examples where they have opened telnet ports to the internet without a password. With an update, because they perform automatic updates remotely. And then from one day to another, everyone on the internet could have access to the digicorder and have a look at your recordings and whatever, and see what you are looking at. So, but you cannot touch it. You cannot even, because in our courses, we also give cybercrime and stuff like that. You're not even allowed to open Wireshark, and take a look at the traffic that is leaving that digicorder, because you are renting it and you are not paying for it. And it's, in theory, it's a license agreement that you do not sniff the traffic coming from that device, which is kind of hard because you bought it or you rent it and you put it in your network. So try to find some compromises where if you have no idea what it is doing, then at least you might be able to monitor the network around it and see what it might be doing. But again, legacy, stuff like that. Yeah, I hope it's changing in the future.
Yeah, let's hope together with you, Tijl, and not only hope, but let's do something about it as well. I think both of us are definitely in that space where we can make a difference, and as we are doing here as well. So with these words, thank you very much for your contribution to this webinar series. It was a pleasure having you, as always. We are reaching 1:30. I just wanted to quickly share a couple of pure facts that we are working towards in terms of our next series before I let everybody off the hook here. And so just on these, as of next week, we will be having yet another of these sessions. Highly likely, not yet fully confirmed, but highly likely it's going to be with Microsoft and Microsoft's Azure Sentinel, basically the IoT platform that that Microsoft has released somewhere at the end of last year. Basically, they announced it already at the Hanover trade show last year, but I think it will be interesting, definitely for this as well, of people working on IoT, working on industrial systems to understand better what they can use of it and how much of impact that the Microsoft platform might be having in the industrial world. Also with the recent purchase of CyberX in Israel, it could be definitely useful in figuring out where Microsoft wants to head to in terms of its industrial cybersecurity activities. And then it's not yet on these slides because it was already relatively recent discussions with them. The second one that we had planned for today, which is Nozomi Networks, will be scheduled to the week afterwards. So that will be Tuesday, 26th of May. And so then we'll have Nozomi Networks, indeed, as you were referring to earlier, Tijl. For this week, we still have some other plans. We are working towards governance and identity and access management in a cloud environment this Thursday. We're still working out details, but in any case, we'll be moving forward with all of our events on identity and access management on Thursdays. And then later on, also this week, we'll be working towards likely ISO 27000 and GDPR approaches on our data protection series. And then in any case, for next week's Tuesday, as I announced already this morning, we'll be having another one of our 5G cybersecurity sessions. And then likely later on in those, we'll be working with how AI is actually impacting cybersecurity and the benefits of AI to cybersecurity, but also how we can actually hack into AI. And so those are a couple of things that we will be seeing coming nearby in the LSEC webinars. So with this, I would like to thank you a lot for your participation. And for those of you who are looking at the recording later on, thanks a lot for not pushing us too much fast forward, but looking very and listening very carefully to what Tijl has been saying. So Tijl, thank you very much again for your presence. All the best to your colleagues, and see you again shortly. And have a nice and safe afternoon. And to all of you out there, stay safe, and looking forward to seeing you again face to face shortly from here. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.